Well, I remember once upon a time when I was a child in the 70s and 80s, I really equated journalists with civil libertarians. I don't know why I thought that way. I think it's because that's how they were. The people who were most concerned about expressive freedom certainly seemed to be in the expressive industry of journalism and its cousins, film and art, visual arts. They used to fight for freedom of speech. Even for things that some of us wouldn't particularly like. There was cases of pornography being kept by border agents, and there were big constitutional battles over whether or not obscenity was free speech. In the end, the political and legal answer was yes, it is. Well, fast forward to where we are now, and I don't see that many civil libertarians left in journalism. In fact, what has been so striking is how the only demographic, the only industry, the only group of people who are cheering for the suspension of liberty, civil liberties in Canada under the Emergencies Act are the journalists. The journalists are the most active, most vocal pressure group demanding the government do what they did and even more. I'm so glad that our next guest is not like that. He, like us at Rebel News, is one of the few independent journalists left in this country who does not take money from Justin Trudeau or any other government. His name is Andrew Lawton. He joins us now via Skype. Andrew, my good friend, you are rare. I'm excited that you're going to Ottawa. Before we talk about that, I know our viewers will be excited. We got a couple guys there, but you and a colleague from True North are going. You have looked through carefully the Emergencies Act order. Why don't you tell me what you find most interesting about it?
Well, I think there were two, and the first was what Chrystia Freeland announced when the government was unveiling this order, which was just the length through which the government is going to go after private citizens' money and allow the banks to do the same without recourse. And you and I have talked on the show, on your show and my show, about free speech and the government's attempt to bring back Section 13. And one of the challenges in how the government wanted to do that was to empower big tech to become the state censors. That's the exact same thing they're doing here with finance. They're empowering banks to, on their own, based on the mere suspicion, as the order says, that it might be in some way connected to the convoy, to freeze accounts, and not only to do that, but to be exempt from civil liability. So when TD Bank says to Gladys that $10 that you sent to the convoy was illegal and they freeze her account, she has no recourse whatsoever. So that's the first point. The second is the complete suspension of mobility rights. Now, remember, Justin Trudeau said this is going to be charter compliant and it's not going after civil liberties. But very explicitly in the emergency order is that traveling to a protest that the government has deemed to be an illegal protest, traveling to Ottawa, what the Ottawa police says, is now illegal. So if the government decides that I don't count as a journalist in their view, I could find myself running afoul of the law tomorrow when I leave to Ottawa, just given how broadly this emergency order is worded.
You know, it's very interesting that you phrase it that way because, of course, the definition of who is or isn't a journalist is a ridiculous but live question in Canada. Of course, a journalist is not like a medical doctor that is a closed profession, subject to some professional body. A journalist is someone who does journalism. It's like, a painter. You paint. If you paint, you're a painter. And it's absurd to claim that you aren't a journalist. It's what you do all the time. It's your full-time job. You check every box of it, except for Justin Trudeau doesn't like the cut of your jib. I remember you and I were in court together in 2019 when they kicked both True North and Rebel News out of the leaders' debates. Justin Trudeau put it on the record that he doesn't like your kind or mine. So perhaps the cops will take that approach. You're not a real journalist. By the way, anyone has the right to be a citizen journalist. But I think it is a real possibility that they try and eliminate the journalists they don't like. That's the whole point of removing civil liberties. You get to do things that you wouldn't. It's like when the real teacher's away and the substitute teacher's there, and then it's like a class where there's no teacher at all. The kids go wild. There's literally no grown-up oversight on this government now. It's immune from judicial procedures. So they're going wild, like grade 4 kids without a teacher in the room. They're going to do terrible things, Andrew. I'm worried. I just hope that the cops on the ground aren't as abusive as Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, David Lametti, et cetera.
Well, yeah, and you raise, I think, two important points there. The first is the subjectivity at play, but also if the government hasn't made public how they actually want this to go down, have they made that clear to police? I saw a video this morning, and it's just, again, one incident, but it, I think, speaks to the problem here of police going around handing out notices to people, which are from the Ottawa police, and they say, you got to get out of town or you could be arrested. And on one video, they handed them to who was clearly a journalist. She had her camera set up on a tripod. She had a microphone in her hand. She was working, and police said, we're giving you this, and they carried on walking. So in a way, police are already putting, intentionally or unintentionally, journalists who are doing their job, and the way the order is worded are not supposed to be covered by it. They're already putting them on notice. So even if the intent is not to do that, if you have confusion because of how vague the government has crafted these, you're definitely going to have situations of that. And again, I don't know where the police are going to stand on this. I don't know in the chain of discussion from Justin Trudeau to the public safety minister to the chief of police right down to the officers. I don't know what's happening in that pipeline of communication, but what I do know is that the government has very deliberately not given information about this, which is why you have so many questions, especially on the finances. If you hand like a roll up the rim tab to a trucker that says you've won a coffee, has that been in the government's eyes material support that gets you thrown in the slammer? No one knows.
Yeah. By the way, I want to make it clear that I think that any journalist has the right to be there, but so does any other citizen. I've never been one to say that journalists have a special higher freedom of speech than ordinary people. In fact, these days, ordinary people, citizen journalists are, I think, the most important journalists. But you raise a good point. I have read the Emergencies Act orders, and earlier today I talked about the financial aspects, which are very troubling. But simply saying you can't go to Ottawa, sorry, that is not a lawful order. The Emergencies Act, the CSIS Act that defines national threats. In fact, the order itself says that peaceful protests are exempt. The whole thing must be charter compliant. Simply saying you may not go to your capital city, a city of 1 million people. And by the way, let's say you're delivering something in a truck. Are you going to be profiled because you're a truck driver? Let's say you're from Toronto visiting a friend in Ottawa. Does the government get to grill you on who your friend is? Like, Ottawa is a major city. It's about 1 million people all in. It's along the big highway stretch between Toronto and Montreal. It's a very high population, high traffic corridor. If you're coming from Montreal to Ottawa, if you're coming from Toronto to Ottawa, you've just nailed about a quarter of the national population right there. Are you saying you can't go to Ottawa? And who? And who gets to judge? And is there any appeal? And is it the personal bigotry of a particular cop at a particular moment? This is so clearly a suspension of civil liberties for its own sake. There is no national crisis here. And that's that. We got to keep that in mind. If, I said this yesterday, Andrew. I got in my car, drove to work, and I thought, gee, the world doesn't feel any different today, even though we had civil liberties lifted. And the reason for that is because there was no cataclysmic crisis that the government was trying to fix, so we didn't notice any problem that needed fixing. The whole thing is a pretext to grab power.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about how broad this is, because the order specifically talks about the critical infrastructure, and with that, they're talking about border crossings and the like, but also locations where COVID-19 vaccines are administered. Now, part of the whole point here is that vaccines are now being administered everywhere. They're being administered at grocery store pharmacies, at walk-in drug stores. They have clinics all over the place. So anywhere that happens to be a vaccine distribution site is now critical infrastructure and thus connected to the protest. Now, why that's particularly important is because the law also says, or I shouldn't say law, it's not a real law. The order says that it is illegal to bring a child and by that they mean anyone under 19, within 500 meters of any protest of critical infrastructure or any other illegal protest. So if you have a bunch of people on Parliament Hill and the government has decided that's illegal, if you bring a minor within 500 meters of that
That's
protest,
half a kilometer. That's crazy.
yes, even accidentally, within 500 meters, you are running afoul of the emergency order, the way it is written.
You know what's so gross is the NDP is so excited about this. Imagine the party of labor unions being against peaceful protests. It's so upside down. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, you've done some stuff. By the way, I'm excited that you're going there, and I want you to hold firm, and I don't want you to bend the knee to any cop making you leave. I mean, I have to tell you, this is your moment. This is your time to shine, Andrew. And I know you will. I've seen you in action. I've seen you in stressful situations rise to the occasion. I know you dress warm, but I think you're going to do great this week. I'm very excited that you're going down. We're going to have a couple rebels down there too. We could have like a Spider-Man, Batman, Superman meetup or something. We got Lincoln J and Alexa Lavoie there. Who's your colleague? You got a new colleague from True North who's going to be down there.
Yes, Elie Quentin-Nantel, who's been doing some tremendous work with us. He's bilingual, and one of the things he's been able to do is cover the really significant Quebec contingent that's joining this protest.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted that you guys are growing, and like I say, you're one of the few freedom-oriented folks left. Last question, because I know you got to run. Thanks for your time. I'm in a bubble. I talk to people who are alarmed and upset by things, and I read emails from rebels. So sometimes I think I'm oversampling people who agree with me, even though I follow on Twitter people who hate me. It's hard to know what reality actually looks like. Do you think that in Canada, in general, outside of the media party and outside of our sort of rebel headquarters, how do you think the ordinary person thinks about what Trudeau's doing? Do they even think about it at all, or is it just more blah, blah, blah? Because it hasn't hit them yet. What do Canadians think about this civil liberties violation?
To be honest, it really depends, Ezra, because there are a lot of people that are, especially on independent media platforms and on social media sites, bypassing Trudeau and bypassing the mainstream media. They're logging on and they're seeing the bouncy castle, the hot tub. Today there was a pig roast, believe it or not. Not kosher, but still delicious. And lots of great things that people are seeing here that are going on and completely peaceful. But then you turn on the mainstream media and you hear, and the government is very clear about this, illegal blockade, illegal blockade. Earlier, I think it was Bill Blair accidentally said blockade, and midway through he corrected it to illegal blockade, because that's the message they're trying to share. And ultimately, it becomes an air war. Are people going to see more of the direct, raw footage from people on the ground, or are they going to be susceptible to the government narrative about this, which is very much targeting political opponents?
Yeah, well, I think this weekend things might break. I said on Twitter, I saw that document being handed out to people. I said the Ottawa police didn't scare away the truckers. Doug Ford announced an Emergency Act. That didn't cause the truckers to leave. Trudeau announced the Emergency Act federally. That didn't cause the truckers to leave. Maybe this brochure will cause the truckers to leave. I don't know. I don't think ordinary beat cops are willing to get brutal with moms and dads and kids having sort of a festival type atmosphere. I just don't think they're going to do it. But who knows? I will know by watching what our reporters, Lincoln and Alexa, do, and what you and your colleague, whose name I cannot pronounce, are doing. So we look forward to, and that's at tnc.news. That's where we'll see your work. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
And of course, you're on Twitter. I like to follow you on Twitter. You're just Andrew Lawton on Twitter. Am I right?
Yeah, and that's also the name of the Substack. I try to keep it simple.
Fair enough. Substack, of course, is your email newsletter, which is a must read. Well, listen, I'm excited for you that you're going to Ottawa, because that is where there's going to be a lot of action. And bring an extra battery pack for your phone, because I know you're going to want to have it on all day. Great to see you, my friend. Good luck.
Thank you.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.